Hi, my name is Justin Crisp, aka Zilla, and today we're going to be making Yu-Gi-Oh! If it came out in 2025. Before we get started, I think it's going to be important to actually define what tech we can actually use to do this in the simplest and easiest way. There are many options, and the most obvious option would be to use Unity, Unreal, or Godot. If you have never worked with a game engine before, you might not know it is a lot more involved than working on web. I have a lot of experience working with web. I've done web dev since at least 2020. Now we can still implement awesome game logic and do really cool stuff with web dev. And also a hidden benefit of this is the amount of reach that you will get by being able to deploy your application across the web. The benefit of doing something on web is you can give someone a taste of what they're actually going to experience before they actually download it. We're going to be exploring a progressive web application that takes Yu-Gi-Oh! And brings it to life in XR using webspatial. Why webspatial? Webspatial is the simplest way that I know that we can bring a web application and put it into an XR environment. It's not perfect though. Webspatial is in very early development and currently only supports an Apple Vision Pro. However, it seems like the developers are working very hard to expand support to both Android and other platforms. All right, I'm excited to work with you all on this video. Please bear with me. This is my first time making an in-depth video, and I'm excited to share my journey with you. Okay, so the first thing I like to do when starting a new project is creating a new repository. If you haven't used GitHub before, it's really easy. Just make an account and you'll have a place where you can store your code. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and create a new repository. For this project, I'm going to call it Yu-Gi-Oh! Example. I already have a live version of this app called Warlock on warlock.net. However, for this video, I wanted to go through it step by step so you can understand how to actually build a WebXR experience as well. So, we'll hit create repository. I'm going to go ahead and copy this code. This lets us create a new repository really quickly inside your favorite terminal. I like Ghosty, so I'm going to cd into my code, and then I'm going to make a new directory, and I'll call this the same name as the repository. Call it Yu-Gi-Oh! Example. And we're going to cd into that, which means change directory. And then we'll go ahead and paste the code. And what this code basically does is it creates a README, it commits it, and it adds it to the main branch while also setting the origin, which is basically the destination that we're uploading our code to. So we'll do this. It's going to push the code there. And now if we go back here, boom, we have initialized our repository. Okay, after your repository is all set up, you can choose whatever IDE you'd like. I would recommend Cursor. There are many reasons for that, but number one is we're going to be working with LLMs a lot in development, and it just makes it way easier. If you don't want to use an LLM, that's great, go for it. But I think Cursor's the best. I used VS Code before, and to make sure you install it if you don't know how, it's pretty straightforward. But we're going to do cursor dot, which opens up Cursor in our current directory. Now that we have Cursor open, I think the first thing we're going to do is define what our project is actually going to be. And to do that, I'm going to open up the terminal with Control tilde, and I'm going to make some docs. The first one we're going to make is going to be a product requirement document. So to do that, I'm going to hit touch prd.md, which is a markdown file. And in here, our product requirement document, basically that's defining the scope of this actual project. And basically it's going to go in depth on the MVP, the deliverables, the constraints, the concerns, and just the scope of the actual project. Now, you don't always need to do this, but if we're going to be making something that we're going to eventually ship to the App Store, it's good to have some idea on what we're actually building. Now, making a PRD is fun, but I don't really want to write the whole thing out myself. So we're going to use an LLM to actually define the document for us, and then we'll go in and edit it to make sure it's well defined. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to target the PRD with @PRD, and I'm going to say the following. Next, I think it's also important to define some of the technical constraints of that we're building. So we're going to write out some of our stack right now. The app will be built with React, since that is what webspatial supports, and it's also going to be the easiest thing for us to launch and deploy on the web. Vite is important as a build tool, and it's the main build tool that's supported by webspatial. Tailwind, CSS, 3JS. 3JS is already a dependency of webspatial, but we're also going to need it if we want to render 3D. Side note, 3D support is not 100% there yet for webspatial. However, there are some workarounds, and I think we can actually mess with the SDK a bit to get it to work. We also want to let it know that we're going to be using webspatial. After defining some of the tech stack, it's going to be important to define what the actual game will be. Next, because this is really just a sample application, we're not going to go too in depth on creating our own custom cards. We're going to use Yu-Gi-Oh as an inspiration for this one, but in the future, I'm going to be changing it out for things that are not just Yu-Gi-Oh branded. This is purely as an example. Okay, so I think we defined the constraints, we talked about the goal of the application, and now we're going to have GPT-5 actually write out the PRD, and then we'll review it. So while ChatGPT is doing its thing, I think there's some other actual markdown files that we'll want to add. Some of these that I like to add are good for when you're working with an LLM to give it context on what we're working on, as well as keeping yourself up to date with what you're doing. So the first one I'm going to make is a to-do list. The next thing I'm going to make is nits markdown, which are basically nitpicky little issues that come up. And we'll just like throw in some small things that come up here and there, whether it's, oh, this card isn't styled correctly, we're missing some sort of dependency and getting a warning, things that are not breaking the app, but we should fix. The next file I want to create is a blockers file. This one lets us know if there are certain things that we're blocked on and need to figure out to get critical features out. That might be, for example, having issues getting 3D rendering in webspatial. That's a problem. And it looks like our PRD is done, or almost done. So we're going to make the blockers file. I'll call it touch blockers block. I'll call it block. Maybe blocks. So it looks like GPT-5 finished rolling out our product requirement document. One neat thing for markdown files is you can actually preview what they look like by clicking on the button right here. And so now we can read this a little bit more easily with the styling of the markdown. So I'm going to go through it really quickly. We have the product requirement document, Yu-Gi-Oh! Inspired chess trading card game, Web plus XR, version 0.1 for our MVP, the today's date, which is today is actually the 14th. So for the overview, it says, build a cross-platform game that blends chess mechanics with trading card summoning, available as a 2D browser app, Spatial XR app using Apple Vision Pro via webspatial. Players construct a deck of cards, then play those cards to summon chess-like pieces onto a 3D board and turns moving pieces per standard chess rules. For the MVP, we use Yu-Gi-Oh! As an example of theme cards and visuals only. Long-term, we will replace these with our own IP. This is good. So let's keep going. We have goals and non-goals. So our goals for the MVP is the deck building, card viewing, playable match, win condition, cross-platform, and our non-goals, which would be things that we are not going to accomplish just yet, but we'll have planned in the future. So online PvP matchmaking, for example, and just more, I would say, complicated long-term thinking for the app. We have our constraints with our tech stack. We have React, Vite, Tailwind, 3JS, and webspatial, which looks correct. I think these are good for now. We have the PRD document. I think the next thing we can do is get started with the application. Okay, now that we have our PRD, some of our other important files for giving context to the LLM and also just staying on track with our project, I think the next thing to do is make sure we commit our changes and we can get started on actually writing the code. Okay, now that we actually committed everything to main, I like to create a new branch so that if we ever mess anything up, we're not messing up main and not just pushing to main directly. So I'll create a new branch. I'll say git checkout -b for a new branch, and I'll call it scaffold for now. All right. Now that we have our new branch, let's go ahead and get started with actually downloading our dependencies and starting up a React application. Okay, so next we're going to actually create our React Vite app. And to do that, we're going to be using PMPM. PMPM is basically NPM, but more quick and space efficient. You can use NPM though if you'd like. So we'll do PMPM, create Vite at latest. We're going to call it client, or I'm going to call it client at the very least. And then we're going to do --template, react-ts. Okay, so we have it, scaffolding project in client. So we're going to go ahead and cd into client. Next, I'm going to do pmpm install. And then from here, I'm going to go ahead and install Tailwind. So we're going to do pmpm install -d for developer dependencies, Tailwind CSS, post CSS, and auto prefixer. These are all dependencies of Tailwind. Okay, next I'm going to create some important files for Tailwind. So that's going to be post CSS config.js and tailwind.config.js. For Tailwind, we have that. Okay, and then in the post CSS file, I'll paste in that. And now let's go ahead and run it. So we'll do pm run dev. All right, and let's open it up. And there we go. Okay, so once this is running, I think it's best practice to usually go ahead and commit our code before things start breaking. So I'm gonna go ahead and commit. So we added React app, Vite, Tailwind. Yep. Okay, next we're gonna go ahead and add the webspatial SDK. All right, I'm gonna make sure I'm in the right directory. So we're gonna cd into client, and then we're gonna go ahead and copy in this code. You can follow along on the, whoops, that's gonna be 3. You can follow along on the webspatial.dev quick example guide. They have some example documents where you will be able to copy in this these commands. We're gonna add the web dependencies as well. Next, it's going to be important for us to go into the tsconfig and go ahead and add the webspatial SDK. You can see that I actually was doing this earlier. All right, so that's going to be in our tsconfig.app and our tsconfig.node. Next, we're going to want to actually add the Vite plugin. Before we do that, we're going to want to make sure we install it. I'm going to copy the code here, and it's just going to be pm add the Vite plugin. Looks like we do have some warnings. However, we should still be fine. Next, I'm going to go into the Vite config.ts, and I'm going to go ahead and add the plugins. Okay, we went ahead and added that. So notice here we have our XR env. So that's going to be important for telling the React app what our target is. So when we're providing the env, when we're actually running our commands, we're letting it know. So for example, if XR env equals AVP, that our app is targeting the Apple Vision Pro. So before we move ahead, I think it's a good time to actually go ahead and add some environment files. To do that, I'm just going to go ahead and add them really quickly. Okay, so we went ahead and made some env files. I'm going to go into my gitignore.env.prod dev local, and now you should see the only one that we're actually not, that we should be including is the example. Okay, next I'm going to add the example template to the .env.example. So these are going to be some of the important variables that we'll be using for webspatial. This first one here is basically letting us know what the dev server is going to point to. We have the following path because we're going to explicitly be hosting our server on this path to target the webspatial version of the application. We'll get into that a little bit later. I'm going to go ahead and apply these to each of the files. Next, I'm going to go into the package.json and add some custom scripts so that it'll make it easier for us to actually run the webspatial version of the app. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add .env. For Vite projects, it's already added, but we need the CLI for us to add the following scripts that we're going to be using with our environment variables. So I'll go ahead and paste this in here. It'll be pm add -d .env and .env CLI. Next, I'm going to add the following scripts, and this is just going to make it a little bit easier to actually run the webspatial version of the app. We have a couple of scripts here. We have run AVP, build AVP, and publish AVP. For this one, I think we're only going to be using run AVP, but it's good to have the others for later on in future videos. Next, before I forget, it's going to be important for us to add our Tailwind information to the CSS index.css file. So it's going to be right at the top. Yeah. To make sure you have the Apple Vision Pro simulator installed, just go ahead and launch Xcode. Then go to the top and go to Settings. And then make sure that you go all the way over to Components and see if you actually have the Vision Pro installed, the simulator. If you don't, you'll say Get and you'll click on it, just like these other ones do. I already have it, so that's why it's installed. All right, next. Now that you have the Apple Vision Pro simulator installed, I'm going to add one more command, and this is going to just be dev. Yeah, so you already filled it in for me, but I'm going to change it a little bit. It'll be dev avp xr env equals AVP vite. Next, this is a very important step. This is going to be for our web manifest file. This manifest file is important for webspatial to understand what our application is. We're basically taking our web app and we're porting it over to a different platform. This is known as a progressive web application, or a PWA. Basically means our web app is going to point to multiple sources other than just the web, and this file is going to let those sources know how to actually work with our application. So I'll go into public, I'll create a new file, I'll call it web manifest, dot web manifest, which is basically a JSON file. You could also name it manifest.json. I already have a pre-prepared one that we're going to use. We're also going to create a new directory. We'll call this icons. Now, the nice thing about AI is we should be able to just give this file to the AI and it should be able to just make them for us. These are going to be placeholders. I just do not feel like going on Figma and actually creating them myself. So let's see if we can do this. So what it's going to do most likely is going to create an SVG and then probably install some package to actually convert it to a PNG. Now, if you're watching and you're following along, you don't need to do this. You could just clone my actual repository and take my images if you want, or create your own based on the sizes that are provided within the web manifest. Either way, I'm going to be pushing this project publicly available on my GitHub so you can clone it and run it on your own. Okay, so I let GPT-5 do this. I probably should have given it to Claude. Whatever. Anyways, it installed some stuff, and I'm just going to show this really quickly because a lot of times when you ask the AI to do stuff within your current working code directory that isn't really related to your code, like generating project images, it's pretty important to actually make sure you get rid of some of that junk. So I'm going to go ahead and delete some of these files that were created. We have a scripts file called generate icons. I don't think we're going to use this again because you just wait and see what icons it created. So I went ahead and created some icons, and brace yourself. I don't know what that is. I'm a little bit afraid to ask. So anyways, we have our icons. Let's go ahead and move on towards the next step, which is actually running the web spatial simulator. Running web spatial in the simulator. I'm going to do pm run avp. Okay, so now we just did what we were doing earlier. We have our web server running. And I just went ahead and ran the web spatial builder. So now what it's going to do is going to go ahead and launch the actual Apple Vision Pro simulator. And we should see our app appear in a spatial capacity. Okay, so our simulator is starting up. And boom, look at that. Our app launched. This is great. You can see in the home, this is our app, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Inspired Chess. If we click on it, this is it. We can close it, reopen it. Boom. Now it's just like a web browser right now, but the next step we're going to do is actually add some spatial components to it. But before we do that, let's go ahead and get this thing populated with some Yu-Gi-Oh cards. For the next step, I kind of want to do a bit of a design step. GPT-5 is actually pretty good at giving or implementing designs in a really loose manner without a lot of direction. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it an image and just tell it to kind of run off with that. All right, so I went ahead and I looked up some images that might be cool. Can see here with Perplexity, I just said holographic inspired UI design like Star Wars. I think it'd be kind of cool if we had this sort of futuristic sci-fi hologram thing going on for Yu-Gi-Oh! So I'm going to copy this image and then I'm just going to paste it into ChatGPT, and I'm going to basically say, yeah, that's pretty good. Let's see what it does. Let's go ahead and actually look in our... One thing I forgot to mention is we need to link the manifest file within our index.html. Okay, so this is Justin from the future. The next part of the video is going to be like showing off the XR capabilities, but unfortunately a bunch of my video didn't have any audio attached, and I was just talking to myself, apparently with no audio. I don't know what happened. Sad. But I want to go over a few really important points that are critical to moving on from where we were, which was implementing the styles, to enabling the XR. Enabling XR is a really important part of using web spatial, and I didn't want to glance over this. So for one of the key points is within our app, the base of our app, inside the app.tsx file, we added a process.env for the XR env. If we have it, if we're providing that, that lets the application know that we should be running our routes via web spatial/avp. You can see that here, when we run the web spatial builder, it's going to be expecting that route in order to render the app correctly. Next, I think it's going to be really important to go over some of the styles. So in our styles, we have the spatial setup, which is going to basically allow us to change the background to be transparent and use some of these XR styles. Within the index.html, I changed it here also to be detecting what our XRENV is. And if our XRENV is equal to AVP, we'll be setting our class to isSpatial, which will enable these styles. There are other styles on top of that. You can see that we have some of these XR styles for the materials to be translucent, which is not transparent. It's kind of like that glass look. We also can translate some of our elements in the Z direction so they pop out a little bit more. There's stuff like that we end up applying, but one of the most important parts of actually getting the spatial designs to work is over within our components. So if I go to the card list component, we're going to have this attribute called enable XR. This attribute is provided by the webspatial SDK and allows us to actually apply the styles that are getting translated to the Apple Vision Pro code and actually have that sort of depth and spatial look that we want from a web spatial from a web spatial experience. Other than that, there's also the Vite config. This is one thing that I'm not sure if I noted, but it's important to make sure that post CSS is set correctly here. If you were following along with the video and you were having issues with Tailwind, make sure to check your vite.config. Other than that, I think that covers the main parts of enabling an XR experience. Everything else is really just about styling, somewhat design, right? We have different data types now. This is all very much boilerplate code and very simple. And I don't think it really lends itself to the actual spatial experience, which is mostly coming from some of the styling and adding the enable XR tag. And really most of it comes down to the setting up the project correctly, because once the project's set up correctly, you can kind of push it more the way that you want to go. All right, made some changes. Right now, the router is actually going to be checking which mode we're in. So the XRENV will set the route to web spatial AVP, which is going to be what we run when we run pm run dev AVP. Cool. So we have 5173 at web spatial AVP. So now we should be running the web spatial version. And I'm going to hit clear here. We're going to go pm run AVP, which is going to start up the simulator. And we should, after making some changes, we've added the enable XR attribute to a bunch of our elements within each JSX file. And importantly, we've also added styles so that we're moving it spatially, so it looks like it's popping out. We have a transparent background set up, and so it should appear very spatial. Hopefully everything goes as planned, because it's definitely not given me any hiccups thus far. Everything's been completely smooth sailing. But I have faith this is going to work. I think we're rendering a few different scenes here, but it does look like it's doing a pretty good job. We have this nice translucent background, so you can kind of see everything. I do think the styles are a little bit messed up, but I think that's fine. Also, the performance is not great right now. That's partially because of my computer. I'm on like the lowest level of Mac Mini. It's gotten better. Okay, cool. So here we are. I think we may have pushed it out of the background a little bit too much, so it's a little bit buggy. I would like to fix that. Like if we can see that we're popping out of the page. Everything is kind of like spatially pushed forward a little bit. Like if you look from here, you can see that we've got these little icons that are the z-axis is slightly higher. And we have a different web spatial view for the actual card itself. You can see that we've got another window here. We can move this. Notice the way that we have this set up is it seems like we're at an askew, like we're at an odd angle. Also, I don't really care for the fact that the background is always blue, but I think we can change that really quickly. Okay, so you can see like it's kind of rotated. I'm going to go ahead and change this. I think I gave an example of the tech shop, and I think it used some of that. So now this is a bit flat. That makes a little bit more sense. It is really cool that we can have this set up, but I don't like the background here doesn't need to be blue. Like that doesn't make any sense. Okay, so a little bit of the issue as to why we actually had the background color still appearing and we weren't doing like a transparent look was because of the fact that we were putting our background color styles within the actual class itself. I'm just going to, and you can see now that we removed it and it's nice and clear. There is some other stuff like the shade doesn't necessarily need to be here. I think it looks kind of cool though. So let's go back to the vault. And I think we can apply some fixes here because we're doing some rotation stuff that's making this a little bit wonky. So let's go ahead and find the rotate. Yeah, I don't think the detail info seems okay. The search container doesn't make any sense to be rotated. The float cards, I would say, don't make any sense to be rotated. That's a little bit better. You can see that it's really popping out of the screen. Once we change this to be a different color, it'll look like to be transparent, it'll look better. But it's still popping out on the Z-axis a little bit too far. That's fine. That's probably fine. Okay, let's go ahead and push this part back a bit more. So I think we have a Z value that is translate Z. So let's do this. This might be it. No, nothing needs to be that far forward. Oh, there it was, right there, 100 pixels. Maybe that wasn't it, I don't know. Okay, yeah, that's a little bit better. Let's see if we can bring the app up a little bit more. I'm kind of frustrated that this is so low. There we go. That's cool. Now we're just going to fix the background here. So the background is going to be within our card shop. And I believe this is the issue that we're setting it here. We could have conditional rendering for the style, but right now it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, see, now it's clear. That looks a little bit better. So there's a lot of improvements that can be made, but it is still really cool to see everything coming out in like somewhat of an XR view. All right, and I think I'm gonna call it here. I think this is a really good start for getting the base app together. This is kind of the simplest thing that we could do. And in the future videos, I'm gonna go ahead and go a little bit deeper into the actual gameplay and doing some cool and interesting things that are special with XR. Thank you again for watching my video. Please like, subscribe, follow, all that jazz. And I look forward to making new and more videos with y'all in the future.